I think barely any millimeters of brain matter at all. I could be wrong, but I think it was just because a cyst formed on where his brain was. So it was just a stem, and that was it. So somehow the stem provided function to his thoughts, to his consciousness, to the stimuli he received, and to emotions.
We talked about last time that I did a little bit more research on it. I said I would, and I did. Pierce did not bail out, did not tap out. He went in and he got the info. We were talking about how those people, and I forgot the term for it. You can tell me what the term for it is, but it's where the person is typically born with fluid inside of their brain, and it's where it doesn't really develop all the way or develop at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
androcephaly
I'm
and
never gonna say
hydrocephaly.
that word, but I did a little bit of research on it, and a lot of the cases that people were actually like somewhat normal, they had significant now. I don't know if significant might be a misleading term, but there was brain cells typically in the outer portion, right next to the skull. That's a few millimeters, and then it goes down, connects to the brainstem, right? And
Absolutely.
oh,
Sorry, carry on.
I'm just my theory on that as a non-medical professional would be that those brain cells kind of adapt. So let's say, obviously they're missing a huge portion of the brain, and that's, not good. But I think those cells really kind of, are putting in work. They're putting in overtime. They're like, Robin over here, working the 50 to 60 hours a week, going crazy. But I think they're really adapting and really working a little bit extra to get that person to a reasonable, intellectual level. So that's kind of my theory on that. And then I think you had brought up another case, and I think this is the same one that I found. Maybe I'm wrong. He lived to be 12 years old. He was born with pretty much just a brain stem, and he couldn't talk, couldn't see, couldn't hear, but he did respond to stimuli. So if they gave him a massage, he responded positively to that. If they pinched him, he wouldn't really like that. If they tickled him, he would respond to that. Is that the case that you were talking about
Yeah,
previously? Okay.
it sounds similar. Yes, I think so.
And I
I'll
guess my
assume so.
theory on that is that, and I don't want to sound like a jerk when I say this, but he kind of minimally met the threshold for being alive. He obviously his blood circulated. He was alive. He may have had thoughts. I can't be certain of that. Obviously, he had some sort of thought process because he was able to analyze the stimuli and respond appropriately. But that's about the minimal for having brain activity. That's like the minimum threshold, right? Responding to stimuli. So I suppose there likely are some brain cells that are capable of thought process in the brain stem, or perhaps there's just a few just millimeters outside of the brain stem. And I think that was probably the what was keeping him alive, telling his heart to beat, telling his kidneys to function, and then obviously having those thought processes, to respond to the stimuli. So that's my theory on that one.
So I would say, firstly, I would just say that's very awesome that you researched that. What I'll say is, Dr. John Larber, a British neurologist. So like the first case, so in his papers, the first cases you describe are hydrocephaly, the less severe case, which would have the few millimeters of brain matter inside
Mm-hmm.
the cranium, and they would actually function. Some actually had uh, a degree. He had actually a bachelor's degree in mathematics, but he has less of a brain than us, like a lot of less, like 60, 70% less of a brain. In fact, it was just a few millimeters thick, and yet he was functioning perfectly normally with a bachelor's degree in mathematics, which I mean, this is kind of like the light argument. This is kind of like if you were to go into a restaurant, this is kind of like the starter course of the argument in terms of um, is consciousness a physical or non-physical process? Because it raises a few questions. Wait a minute, we have a lot of our, lots of stuff to our brain. Surely all of it's important, but if this guy with just a few millimeters of brain matter can do that, then it raises questions. He's completely normal, he's completely functioning, and yet he has that. But the second point is about the Andrew Kandal, which is, I'm assuming, the same guy you mentioned. Um, you said that he was on the verge of living. The thing is, with that, all we can in science, I've spoke to a couple of people in who deal with, I think, or who are like part of a consensus board of scientists in different fields. And the atheist actually, he debunks me a lot. He's actually very clever. But he says that science can't measure qualia, which is the quality of something generally, especially in a human being. It can't really measure the quality of something. So, for instance, when you say he's on the verge of living, scientists can't really. Obviously, he did die at 12 because of his state, but he was living all through that state until he died. So my point is that we can't actually put a number on how, or like a figure on how his quality of or verge of living is. We just know at the time he was living, and as you say, we don't really know um, how deep his thought process was. We just know he had one, and we also know that he had some form of consciousness too. And with Andrew Kendall, according to the papers, especially that I think it was John Larber posted, he didn't actually have, I think, barely any millimeters of brain matter at all. I could be wrong, but I think it was just because a cyst formed on where his brain was, so it was just a stem, and that was it. So somehow the stem provided function to his thoughts, to his consciousness, to the stimuli he received, and to emotions. And that is
Yeah,
interesting, in my opinion.
well, it's definitely interesting. And I would agree with you that science can't really determine the quality of life, and we will never really know what exactly his thought processes were, how advanced they were, whether they were at a level of a genius or at the level of perhaps just being able to respond to stimuli, and that's it. So yeah, I would agree with you
Yeah,
that there's a
exactly.
big unknown there.
Yeah, it's a little spooky, some of these things. Like like here's the thing. Here's the thing. Like I know you don't believe in Christianity, but let's just say for argument's sake, like Christianity could be true, and consciousness might not originate in the brain, but these things could be very well physically thing. You know what I mean? Like these uh, arguments I'm giving, of course, even though I do believe they support the idea of, to some degree, not 100%, but to some degree, they give a little bit of nudges to the non-physical side of things. I think that it's very well possible that these things could just be all somehow described in a physical manner, but even it might not even be physical to
Hmm.
begin with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, kind of. So they
Yeah.
can be described physically, but they might not actually be physical.
I'm saying that is like I'm taking the view of like an open-minded view. Like I'm saying, obviously, I haven't had an explanation yet that can perfectly describe them in the physical. I mean, there are many neurologists that don't actually know. It just perplexes them because you can't really fit. This actually goes against the consensus of the neurological model. You know that because the brain is very important. There are so many functions like the left hemisphere, the cortex, all these other things. They do very important things. Almost every part of the brain is so important. So the fact that someone could react to stimuli and all this other business and have consciousness, etc., on a stem, it's just it's like it
Hmm.
contradicts it almost. It's just very weird. So so yeah, it baffles the consensus really. They just don't know what's going on. So they make theory, but to fit this in like a naturalistic model is something I haven't actually seen done effectively.
I I kind of see what you're saying, uh, but I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
my stance is that, for example, if someone has a brain injury, I don't know the brain
Mhm.
intimately, so I can't really talk in too technical of terms, but let's just say it's in one specific area that affects language, for example. So for a while, they're really going to be
Yeah.
struggling with language, I would expect. But then over time, they
They
typically
yeah.
do get better in that particular region that was injured. The other parts of the brain are able to adapt and kind of take over that language portion. Of course, they may not ever fully regain and fully recover and be exactly as linguistic as they were previously, but a lot of times they do recover to some degree. So I think that kind of shows how the brain can adapt at least to some degree, and perhaps even the brainstem can.
No, I agree. The brain is great.
I'm sorry, that was all garbled. I couldn't understand.
Okay,
Okay,
no, I was just agreeing with you. I said, yeah, the brain is
yeah,
great.
and I guess that's just where I'm at.
So how can here's a question. How can the brain adapt if there isn't one? It's just a
Well,
stem.
I don't know a lot about the brainstem, but I assume this is a big assumption. I guess I should have researched this more, but I assume that there's some cells in the brainstem that can act like brain cells that are in the rest of the brain, perhaps.
So have you do you have
I
any
haven't, and I really
research on
should
that?
have. I guess I made that assumption, and that's not good to make assumptions. So I guess that's some research that I would have to do.
That's okay. But hey, thanks for
Yeah,
bringing it up.
no problem. You know what? I'm gonna do more research, and I'll see if I can come to a conclusion on that brainstem.
Sure. I mean, I know the brainstem carries it would carry some information, but I wouldn't know if it's because like obviously our spine because our spine itself carries um, neurological I don't want to say
Mm-hmm.
neurological like neurons or something the brain. So the brain stem, I feel, would act. Again, I would have to research this as well. I think Dr. John Marber does mention some of this in his papers, but it's like it carries information to the brain, but it isn't the enterprise that does all the work. So, for instance, it's kind of like say you had a uh, let me think. Say you had
So it's kind of like the highway and not the actual car, to make an analogy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, yeah, thank you. So it's not the destination. It's like the like you say, it's the journey. So it's like saying that the
Sure.
journey is the destination. That makes any sense. Or the journey is, but it's like where all the fun happens. Let's just say, you know what I mean when I say fun, right? Where all the crazy stuff happens, all the work, all the cognitive function, etc., would be in the destination. But to say that all of that fun happens in the journey, I had never heard of this before, especially in the neurological field.
Yeah, I understand, and um, I, perhaps even more research on the researcher level, the people doing dissecting. Perhaps they could even dig a little deeper into that to see what type of cells are actually in the brain cell, or maybe it's already been done, and we just need to look into that a little bit more. But yeah, it's I I, I think you would agree that we both need to look into it a little bit.
Definitely, definitely, and I thank you for encouraging
Yeah,
that, my friend.
not a
Honestly.
problem.